Anything Democrats can do to stop the president? I'm joined by Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, a member of the Judiciary Committee. Is this the flagrant power play that it appears to be in your mind?
It is a break the glass moment, an attack on our democracy, and it should precipitate exactly the kind of firestorm that we saw in the wake of the Saturday night massacre under Richard Nixon. It is, in effect, a slow motion Saturday night massacre. And the reason that they are doing it in this slow motion way is to avoid that uproar and uprising that I think now my Republican colleagues have an obligation to show. So first point, he must recuse himself. Whitaker has not only demonstrated hostility to this investigation, he's also provided a roadmap for strangling the funds that are necessary for it. Ultimately, the Congress has the power of the purse, and the Democratic...
Okay. So, the White House is in absolute meltdown mode right now, and what just happened inside a cabinet meeting is something we haven't seen in modern American political history. We're talking about cabinet members openly turning on the president in real time, confronting him directly in front of the entire room, and sources are saying Trump was literally forced to leave the meeting after multiple senior officials made it clear they would no longer follow certain directives. This isn't some anonymous leak or behind-the-scenes whispers anymore. This is open rebellion from within Trump's own cabinet, and the implications for his presidency, for the stability of the executive branch, and for American governance heading into 2026 are absolutely massive. We're not talking about political disagreements here. We're talking about senior officials appointed by Trump himself essentially saying they will not comply with what they believe are unlawful or dangerous orders, and doing it in a room full of witnesses. The White House is scrambling to contain the fallout, but this story is already everywhere. And it's fundamentally changing the conversation about Trump's second term. Now, before we get into the details of what actually went down in that meeting, I need to be straight with you about something. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. They're either covering for the administration or sensationalizing everything to the point where you don't know what's real. That's why we built US Power Alert to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. We break down what's actually happening in Washington, what it means for you, and why it matters, every single day. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand the real story behind the chaos, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you, no filter, no agenda. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about the truth and about understanding how power really works in this country, this is your moment. Subscribe, drop a comment with your take on what's happening, because this is the kind of story where your perspective matters. Here's what happened. According to multiple sources who were either in the room or briefed immediately afterward, Trump called a cabinet meeting that was supposed to be about finalizing his approach to federal spending cuts and emergency tariff implementation. This was meant to be a standard strategy session where he'd lay out the plan and everyone would fall in line. But that's not what happened. Instead, what unfolded was a direct confrontation between Trump and at least 3 senior cabinet officials who made it clear they would not support certain actions Trump was planning to take. We're talking about the Attorney General, the Secretary of Defense, and reportedly the Director of National Intelligence, all raising serious objections in front of the entire cabinet. The core issue appears to be Trump's plan to use emergency powers to implement sweeping tariffs without congressional approval and to unilaterally freeze federal grant funding to states that have been challenging his policies in court. These cabinet members apparently told Trump, in no uncertain terms, that they believed these actions would be legally indefensible, that they would likely be blocked by courts immediately, and that they could not in good conscience support or implement them. Now, here's where it gets intense. Sources say Trump became visibly angry when the Attorney General specifically said that the Department of Justice could not defend these actions in court, because they appeared to violate both the separation of powers and established appropriations law. The Attorney General reportedly said something along the lines of the DOJ's responsibility being to the Constitution first, not to any individual president. The Defense Secretary apparently backed this up by saying that using defense-related emergency authorities for trade policy would undermine military readiness and the credibility of actual national security emergencies. The Director of National Intelligence reportedly raised concerns about how these moves would be perceived by allies and adversaries, essentially warning that this kind of unilateral executive action would signal instability and unpredictability to the rest of the world. What happened next is what's really making waves. According to these sources, Trump demanded that these officials either get on board or resign. And here's the thing. They didn't resign. Instead, they made it clear they would stay in their positions and continue to fulfill their constitutional duties, but that they would not implement or defend actions they believed to be unlawful. That's when things apparently escalated. Trump reportedly started raising his voice, accusing these officials of disloyalty and insubordination. And this is where multiple sources confirm the same detail. Senior White House staff, possibly including the chief of staff, essentially intervened to end the meeting, with Trump leaving the room while still visibly agitated. The phrase "dragged from the meeting" is obviously dramatic, but what sources are describing is a situation where Trump was essentially forced to leave because the meeting had devolved into open conflict and staff wanted to prevent it from getting worse. The immediate aftermath has been chaos. The White House initially tried to deny the meeting even happened, then shifted to saying it was a robust policy discussion and is now in full damage control mode trying to downplay the confrontation. But the problem is, too many people were in that room, and the story is already out there in too much detail. Republicans on Capitol Hill are reportedly in full panic, with some calling emergency meetings to figure out how to respond. Democratic leadership is already calling for congressional hearings to determine what orders Trump was trying to give, and why his own cabinet felt compelled to refuse them. International partners are quietly reaching out to State Department officials, trying to understand if the U.S. government is stable and who's actually making decisions. And markets are reacting to the uncertainty, with volatility spiking as investors try to price in the risk of executive branch dysfunction. But to really understand what this means, we need to understand the constitutional and institutional framework we're operating in here. The cabinet in the American system exists in this interesting space. Cabinet members are appointed by the president and serve at his pleasure, meaning he can fire them whenever he wants. But they also take an oath to the Constitution, not to the president personally. They're executive officers, yes, but they're also supposed to be stewards of their departments and of the law. And here's the key part. There's actually a provision in the Constitution, the 25th Amendment, that allows cabinet members to declare a president unable to discharge the duties of the office. Now, we're not there yet, this isn't that, but the existence of that amendment tells you something important. The founders understood that there might be situations where the president's own cabinet would need to act as a check on presidential power. What we're seeing here is something different but related. We're seeing cabinet members essentially saying, "We will not be instruments of unlawful action, even if the president orders it." This is actually exactly what the system is designed for when it's working correctly. The problem is, it creates a massive crisis of governance when it happens openly, and when it happens over core policy priorities that the president has been promising his base for months. The legal issues here are pretty straightforward, even though they're being made complicated by the politics. Federal spending is controlled by Congress through the appropriations process. The president doesn't have the authority to just freeze grant money that Congress has already allocated unless there's a very specific legal basis for doing so, like fraud or mismanagement. Using grant freezes as a political weapon against states that are challenging you in court, that's almost certainly illegal under the Appropriations Clause and potentially under the First Amendment as retaliation for the exercise of legal rights. Similarly, tariffs and trade policy do involve executive authority, but that authority comes from statutes that Congress passed, like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and various trade laws. Those statutes have limits. They're designed for genuine economic or national security emergencies, not for implementing a comprehensive trade agenda that couldn't get through Congress. The Attorney General knows this, the White House counsel knows this, and apparently, they've been telling Trump this for weeks. The issue is that Trump, according to sources, has been ignoring that legal advice and pushing forward anyway, apparently believing that he can do it, fight it out in court, and win through sheer political pressure. What happened in this cabinet meeting is essentially senior officials saying, "That's not how this works, and we're not going to be part of it." Now, let's break down what this actually means, because this is way bigger than just one bad meeting. First, understand that this fundamentally undermines Trump's authority within his own administration. If your cabinet members are openly defying you, if they're telling you they won't implement your orders, you've lost control of the executive branch. And this isn't just about these specific policies.
Just last
Once it becomes
night
knowledge
demonstrate that the American public wants checks on this kind of abuse and overreach. So my Democratic colleagues and I on the Senate Judiciary Committee and on the House Judiciary Committee should press for an investigation and for legislation. I'm going to be proposing legislation that will stop the defunding or cuts in funding for the special counsel and also require a report. So all of those thumb drives that were referred to earlier are made public through a report prepared by the special counsel. Even better, indictments and charges brought by the special counsel, which he may be on the verge of doing.
I want to play for you what the Chuck Schumer, who of course is the minority leader in the Senate, had to say on this today. Take a listen.
Same. Career officials, agency heads, even political appointees who might have been on the fence, they now know they have cover to resist directives they believe are problematic. This creates a situation where Trump can give an order and have no confidence it will actually be carried out. That's a crisis of executive function. It means the presidency is weakened, maybe not permanently, but certainly in the immediate term. And that has huge implications for everything Trump wants to accomplish in his second term. If he can't count on his own cabinet, how does he implement his agenda? How does he negotiate with Congress when they know his own team is divided? How does he project strength internationally when everyone knows his government is in chaos? Second, this raises the very real possibility of mass resignations or firings. Trump could decide to fire the Attorney General, the Defense Secretary, the DNI, anyone who opposed him in that meeting. But here's the problem with that. If he does, he has to nominate replacements, and those replacements have to be confirmed by the Senate. And right now, the Senate, even with a Republican majority, is not in the mood to rubber stamp controversial nominees, especially if it looks like Trump is purging anyone who dares to disagree with him. We've already seen how difficult it can be to get nominees through when there are doubts about their qualifications or their willingness to act independently. If Trump fires multiple cabinet members at once over their refusal to implement potentially illegal policies, that's going to make confirmation battles even harder. He could end up with acting officials running major departments for months, which further weakens the government's ability to function. And every day that drags on is another day of headlines about chaos, dysfunction, and instability. Third, and this is huge, this gives Democrats and even some Republicans in Congress a massive opening. If Trump's own cabinet is saying these policies are unlawful, that's political gold for congressional oversight. House and Senate committees are going to haul these officials in for testimony. They're going to ask under oath, what orders did the president give you? Why did you believe they were unlawful? What legal analysis did you rely on? And here's the thing. Cabinet officials who have already publicly broken with the president have very little incentive to cover for him when they're under oath. They're going to tell the truth, because their credibility and their legal exposure depend on it. That testimony is going to create a record that follows Trump for the rest of his presidency. It's going to be used in court cases challenging his executive actions. It's going to be used in political campaigns in 2026. It's going to be used by historians writing about this era. And it completely undercuts Trump's ability to claim that his actions are legally sound when his own Attorney General is on record saying they're not. Fourth, this is a massive problem for Trump's international standing and for U.S. credibility with allies. Foreign leaders and foreign governments pay very close attention to internal political dynamics in the United States because they need to know if the president they're dealing with can actually deliver on commitments. When they see cabinet members openly defying the president, when they see chaos in the executive branch, they start to hedge. They start to wonder if deals they make with Trump will actually be implemented, or if they'll be blocked by his own government. This is particularly important for Trump's foreign policy agenda. Whether that's renegotiating trade deals, managing relationships with NATO allies, dealing with China, handling the situation in Ukraine, all of that requires allied governments to believe that Trump can speak for the United States, and that his word means something. When your own cabinet is in open revolt, that credibility evaporates. Allied leaders start going around the president, dealing directly with cabinet members or with Congress, trying to figure out who's actually in charge. And adversaries like Russia and China, they see this as weakness and opportunity. They see a president who can't control his own government, and they probe for advantage. This makes American foreign policy weaker and more reactive at a time when Trump is supposed to be projecting strength. Fifth, let's talk about the political implications heading into 2026. Trump's entire brand is built on being a strong leader who gets things done, who doesn't take no for an answer, who dominates every room he's in. This story completely undercuts that narrative. It shows a president being confronted by his own appointees, being unable to get them to follow his orders, and essentially being forced to retreat from a meeting in his own White House. That is not the image of strength that Trump needs to maintain heading into the midterms. Democrats are going to use this relentlessly. They're going to run ads showing chaos, dysfunction, cabinet members refusing to implement Trump's agenda, and they're going to ask voters if this is the kind of leadership America needs. And here's the problem for Republicans. They can't really defend this. They can try to spin it as Trump being tough and his cabinet being weak or disloyal, but that doesn't really work when the issue is whether the president was trying to break the law. If Republican candidates have to spend 2026 defending Trump's attempt to bypass Congress and defy his own cabinet, that's a losing message in swing districts and competitive states. It energizes the Democratic base, it gives independents reasons to stay home or vote Democrat, and it puts vulnerable Republicans in an impossible position. Sixth, there's the very real question of what Trump does next. Does he back down on these policies now that his cabinet has made it clear they won't support them? That would be a humiliating retreat, and an admission that his own team can veto his agenda. Does he fire everyone who opposed him and try to install loyalists who will do whatever he says? That risks Senate confirmation battles, accusations of corruption and authoritarianism, and potential government paralysis. Does he try to go around his cabinet and implement these policies anyway through other means? That invites immediate legal challenges, court losses, and further evidence that he's acting outside the law. None of these options are good. Every path forward from here involves either backing down, escalating the conflict with his own government, or facing legal and political defeats that weaken him further. And the clock is ticking. The longer this drags on, the more it dominates the news cycle. The more it becomes the story of Trump's second term, chaos and dysfunction instead of accomplishment and leadership. Seventh, we need to think about what this means for the actual policies that were being discussed. If Trump can't implement sweeping tariffs through emergency powers, if he can't freeze federal funding to punish political opponents, then major parts of his economic and political agenda are essentially dead in the water, unless he can get Congress on board. And getting Congress on board means compromise, negotiation, and accepting limits on what he can do. That's not Trump's style. He's built his career on unilateral action, on executive orders and emergency declarations, on doing things his way without having to answer to anyone. But if his own cabinet won't support that approach, and if courts are going to block him at every turn, he's going to be forced into a much more conventional presidency, where he has to work within the system. That might be better for the country in terms of constitutional governance, but it's a disaster for Trump's political brand and for his ability to deliver on the promises he's made to his base. His supporters expect him to be a disruptor, to break things, to fight the establishment. If he ends up being constrained by his own cabinet and by the courts, that's going to create disillusionment and frustration among his core voters, which could depress turnout in 2026 and complicate any potential future political ambitions. And here's the thing that should really worry everyone, regardless of your politics. We're talking about a situation where the executive branch of the federal government is essentially at war with itself. The president wants to do one thing, his cabinet is refusing to do it, and there's no clear mechanism to resolve that conflict quickly. The 25th Amendment exists for situations where the president is incapacitated, but this isn't that. This is a president who's fully functional, but who's being checked by his own team. Impeachment exists for high crimes and misdemeanors, but we're not there either. Or at least not yet. What we're in is this gray area, where the president has lost the confidence and support of key members of his own administration. But there's no constitutional crisis big enough to trigger the emergency provisions. So we're stuck in this ongoing dysfunction where every day brings new leaks, new confrontations, new questions about who's actually running the government. And that kind of sustained chaos is corrosive. It undermines public confidence in institutions. It makes it harder for the government to respond to actual crises when they emerge. It sends a signal to the rest of the world that America is turning inward and can't get its act together. And it creates opportunities for bad actors, whether that's corrupt officials taking advantage of the confusion, foreign adversaries making moves while America is distracted, or extremist groups trying to exploit political instability. So where do we go from here? Well, the immediate next steps are pretty predictable. Congressional committees are going to launch investigations. They're going to subpoena documents, call witnesses, and try to establish a public record of what Trump ordered and why his cabinet refused. The White House is going to try to assert executive privilege and slow-walk cooperation, but that's going to be harder than usual because the witnesses they need to protect are the very officials who are already breaking with Trump. The Attorney General isn't going to lie for Trump when called to testify. The Defense Secretary isn't going to claim he doesn't remember what happened in a meeting that just took place. These officials have already made their stand, and they're going to stick to it. Meanwhile, Trump is going to have to decide how to handle the cabinet members who defied him. If he fires them, expect massive political blowback and difficult confirmation fights. If he keeps them, expect ongoing leaks, continued resistance, and a public perception that he's too weak to control his own administration. Either way, he loses. And while all this is playing out, the courts are going to start ruling on the legal challenges to Trump's executive actions. We've already seen judges blocking his attempts to use emergency powers for tariffs and federal funding freezes. Those rulings are going to keep coming, and they're going to cite the very concerns that Trump's own cabinet members raised. That creates a legal record that's going to be very hard to overcome on appeal. Internationally, allies are going to continue reaching out to try to understand if the U.S. government is functional and who they should be talking to. There's going to be a lot of quiet diplomacy where foreign officials are essentially bypassing the White House and working directly with cabinet secretaries, members of Congress, and career officials to keep relationships on track and prevent major policy disruptions. That's embarrassing for the presidency, and it further weakens Trump's ability to drive foreign policy. Adversaries are going to test U.S. resolve. We could see provocations from China in the South China Sea, from Russia in Ukraine or Eastern Europe, from Iran in the Middle East, all designed to see if America can respond coherently when its own government is divided. And markets are going to remain volatile as long as this uncertainty persists. Investors hate political instability, especially when it involves the executive branch of the world's largest economy. Every new headline about cabinet drama, every new leak about internal fights, every new court ruling against Trump's policies, that's going to create selling pressure and risk aversion. It makes everything more expensive. It makes businesses less likely to invest and hire. And it creates economic headwinds that make it harder to deliver the growth and prosperity that Trump has promised. Politically, this is going to reshape the 2026 landscape in ways we're only beginning to understand. Democratic candidates now have a clear message. Trump can't govern. His own cabinet won't follow him. And America deserves better. Republican candidates are going to be split between defending Trump and trying to distance themselves from the chaos. And voters in the middle, the independents and moderates who decide close elections, they're going to be asking themselves if they really want 2 more years of this. The fundamentals still matter: the economy, national security, healthcare, education, but perception matters too. And the perception of a president who's lost control of his own government is devastating. It makes every other problem seem worse because voters don't trust that leadership can solve it. It energizes the opposition and demoralizes your own base. And it creates a narrative that's very hard to change once it takes hold. Once the story becomes Trump's presidency is in chaos, every subsequent event gets interpreted through that lens. A cabinet resignation becomes more evidence of dysfunction. A policy failure becomes more proof that he can't govern. A strong jobs report gets overshadowed by the latest leak about internal White House drama. That's a very hard narrative to escape, especially heading into an election year. So here's the bottom line. What happened in that cabinet meeting is more than just a bad day for Trump. It's a fundamental breakdown in the relationship between the president and his own administration. When cabinet members openly refuse to implement a president's orders, when they do it in front of witnesses, and when they make it clear they're prepared to stay in their jobs and continue resisting, you're looking at a crisis of executive authority that goes way beyond normal political disagreements. This calls into question Trump's ability to govern, his control over his own branch of government, and his credibility both domestically and internationally. The fallout is going to be massive and ongoing. We're going to see investigations, legal battles, political warfare, and quite possibly a rolling series of resignations or firings that keeps the administration in a constant state of chaos. And all of this is happening with less than 2 years until the midterms, at a time when Trump should be consolidating power and building momentum for his agenda. Instead, he's fighting his own cabinet, defending himself against accusations that he tried to break the law and watching his political capital evaporate in real time. This could define the rest of his presidency. It could determine whether Republicans hold Congress in 2026. And it could reshape the balance of power between the executive branch and the other institutions of American government for years to come. This story is far from over. Keep your eyes on the congressional investigations, on who stays and who goes in the cabinet, on how courts rule on Trump's executive actions, and on how all of this plays in swing states and competitive districts heading into 2026. Because what we're watching right now isn't just political drama. It's a test of whether American institutions can constrain a president who's willing to push beyond legal and constitutional limits, and whether those institutions still have the strength and independence to do their jobs, even when it means defying the most powerful person in the country. That's the real story here, and it's going to play out over the coming months in ways that matter for all of us, regardless of our politics. Stay tuned, stay informed, and make sure you're following sources that give you the full picture, not just the spin. This is the kind of moment where understanding what's really happening isn't just interesting, it's essential.